right, welcome back everyone. After the lunch break, we just finished our first innovation area this morning. I hope you took good time to refuel, get some energy, to connect, to visit the exhibition. Now we're ready to jump into our innovation area number 2. Laura, what's next?
Yes, so the next one is actually something I read in the program, and I was like, what is this? And I also asked the same question actually to our next panelists, or it's actually Hannah Lemke, founder and CEO of Right Based on Science, and she's partnering up with Sina Wenz, and she's co-founder of Sustainable Thinking. And what they just told me is, no worries, we're going to explain you in a second what it means to talk about temperature alignment metrics and how can company use it for holistic climate management. So I'm pretty excited because I didn't know what it is, and I welcome you on stage for our next conversation. Please enjoy.
Warm welcome.
And listen carefully.
Stage is all yours. And the applause as well.
Sina, it's really a pleasure to share with you the stage on the Impact Festival. I really hope you've had a good day so far and that you met a lot of incredible and interesting people. We both are here today to share insights really from the forefront of the transition to a 1.5 degree world and speak about a holistic climate management system and the role of science-based forward-looking climate impact metrics. So Sina, can you give us a few insights? Why is it that companies are now so intensively working on climate-related topics? What has changed in the past couple of years and what are the drivers for that change?
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. I'm also really happy to be here today and to talk about this really important topic. So yeah, what we see is due to our intense resource consumption and the intense release of greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere, we are bringing our climate towards its tipping points. So the climate crisis is developing towards a permanent risk for companies. And companies who are not sustainable now, they are really challenged to be this in the near future. To leave behind an intact world, we need to act now, and this is something also governments realized. And to mitigate risks, governments are passing an increasing number of laws which have an impact on climate and sustainability, and companies need to demand on corporate responsibility and accountability. Moreover, we see that multiple stakeholders are asking for sustainability action in companies, and stakeholders like consumers, partners, banks, and they all want to know what companies are doing. So we can say that a serious commitment to sustainability is necessary to be competitive in the future as a company. What do you currently see as the biggest driver for this sustainability transformation, Hannah?
So from my perspective, central to all of those processes that you have just mentioned is this new focus. The major guidance now for any climate-related decision or any climate-related activity is the Paris Climate Agreement. The 1.5 degree goal is the benchmark now for what is a good decision and for what is an insufficient decision. So we're no longer talking about what are companies doing in terms of climate-related activities. We're now asking, are they doing enough to hit the 1.5 degree benchmark? Sina, how can a holistic climate management help companies with that new focus that we experience? And what do you actually mean with the term of holistic?
Yeah, so this is a really important point because a holistic climate management goes beyond the emission perspective. Okay, emissions are important. We all know that we need these databases. But a holistic climate management also includes governance structure, so responsibilities for climate issues in the company. And it also needs a holistic view on climate risks and chances, so a climate risk management. And climate strategy and climate target setting, this is where you are really strong at. only when companies have a strategy and processes established to respond to those 5 areas of climate management, they are able to respond to the climate crisis in an adequate way. And as you said, only then they are able to respond to the question, are you doing enough?
And Sina, what's your impression? Are companies set up? Are they ready?
Yeah, I think companies are really busy at the moment with getting the information on their emissions, and that is important. But it's only one element of holistic climate management. And so the view beyond the emissions is really important, but it's not happening enough, because that is due to a lack of resources and lack of know-how in the companies. And I want to point out why it is so important to look beyond emissions. If companies don't do that, they don't get the whole picture on their climate risks the company is confronted with, and also market opportunities remain untapped. I want to give you 2 examples. The one is, we work with a company, they are based at the Rhine, and the Rhine is often have too much water and not enough water, so in some supply chains are interrupted. And that is why this company is asking themselves, do we need to find a headquarter at another location? So you see, climate risks have a huge impact on corporate strategies. And the other thing is, when we look at the chances of the climate transformation or the sustainability transformation, those companies who already respond to climate challenges, like the providers of e-mobility infrastructure, for example, they can really use now this competitive advantage in comparison to their competitors. We have a climate tool, we have a climate risk tool to identify climate risks and chances, and that is really important to steer those topics in the company. We especially find the XTC to be a really effective tool when it comes to target setting and climate strategy establishment. What do you experience concerning the use of climate metrics and the XTC?
I think here it's really important to emphasize that starting with emission data is very important. It's a very important raw data point. However, a carbon footprint should really not be confused with a climate impact metric. A carbon footprint is a backward-looking data point, and it's not comparable between companies of different sizes in different sectors. And this is why it needs to be turned into something that can be used for steering towards the 1.5 degree goal, and that's then what we call temperature alignment. A climate impact metric expressing the climate impact of a company in a tangible degree Celsius figure based on a methodology that allows the company to steer towards 1.5 degree alignment. The goal of the Paris Climate Agreement is expressed in temperature. So it makes totally sense to express the climate impact of a company also in temperature and use methodologies that allow towards steering 1.5 degree alignment. And our X degree compatibility model, the XDC model, is such a forward-looking methodology calculating the climate impact of a company under various business development scenarios. So we respond then to the question, where does a company stand with regards to the climate impact measured in a degree Celsius figure so that it can be compared to the 1.5 degree goal? And how effective are actually my climate goals? Are they sufficient to reduce the gap between my current temperature and the 1.5 degree world? And most climate goals aren't, I can tell you. And then what is the effect of any other business related scenarios on the climate impact, and what does it again mean for the financial materiality of climate related risks? So the transparency, however, that comes with that analysis can be extremely tough.
Yeah, and how does companies deal with a high degree XTC, so to say a bad result, a bad XTC?
Yeah, that's of course very often a moment of shock. It's a very emotional moment when I learn that I'm steering a 4-degree company or that I work for a 3.5-degree company. And it's pretty frustrating when I learn that the climate goals that I have set don't make a big difference, that there is simply not enough to get down to 1.5-degree alignment. However, this sense of anxiety is then very quickly replaced by relief, by appreciation of clarity and the transparency that comes with that analysis, because only that positions people and brings them into the position to ask the really relevant questions. What are the drivers of my climate impact? What brings the temperature so high? What is the effectiveness of key measures in my sector? How can I leverage my business model to implement the measures that will really get me to 1.5-degree alignment? And where are my competitors? So the result of this analysis is the transparency. Again, transparency, transparency, transparency on what it takes from a business development perspective to bring the company down to 1.5-degree alignment. And in this process, what we observe is that the role of collaboration and the need for new alliances becomes so apparent. So just think of a climate manager who needs to convince the controlling department to really invest in those significant emission reductions. Or think about a company going into a conversation with the capital markets about new and innovative financing instruments that really reward the company to reduce its temperature because it might be connected to better performance and lower risks. So, Sina, when we measured the climate impact, that's what we do, we're the measurement guys, we're often asked, what can I do now? So, okay, I'm 4.2 degrees aligned, what can I do now to get down? And that is where the consulting then comes in. So, how do you approach that side?
Yeah, that's true. So this is the moment where we come into play and help companies to establish really concrete climate strategies to reach their climate goals. But we do this in a little bit a different way than everyone knows what consultancy is, right? But we believe that also consulting needs to change. Everything is changing, so also consultancy needs to change. And you said an important point, and I want to come back to that because collaboration is the key. And we need more collaboration within companies. The questions around sustainability and climate are too complex, too wicked problems. No company can solve these problems alone. We need more collaboration and more partnership, and that is why we from Sustainable Thinking developed the Thinking Circle approach. So we bring together up to 10 companies in a setting where they can collaborate on their climate questions, on their sustainability questions. They really develop solutions together. Transparency is also here the key. And it's about a strong commitment to solve these sustainability issues together. And yeah, like that, we really have an impact on changing also the mindset of competition and towards more like collaboration. What is motivating you on the work with measurement frameworks?
So what keeps me up at night is really the fact that so many companies claim they have sustainability in their DNA. So many frontrunners, so many pioneers, but we're still vastly overshooting the 1.5-degree budget. So what motivates me is to help measure whether good is actually good enough. Sina, what about you?
Yeah. The time is running and we don't have enough time left for reaching Paris Agreement, and I think collaboration is the key. This is my main driver for what I'm doing every day. I want to bring collaboration into life so that companies can solve their issues together. And I like to motivate them to collaborate and instead of competition. And it also gives me the chance to collaborate with great partners like you, Hannah, and yeah, and that is why I want to say thank you for sharing the stage with me today. Thanks to the audience for listening, and hope to see you soon here at the venue or afterwards. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. I hope you all now have a better understanding what they were talking about. And it's actually also a good question to ask ourselves, how often do you think about human rights in the supply chain? Can be anything. Can be you go to the supermarket, you can buy any product somewhere. How much or how important is it in your opinion that we really have to make sure that we don't violate human rights, for instance, when we buy consumer goods? Can you maybe raise your hands? If you say, this is very important to me, I think we should definitely track it, raise your hands. Yes, thank you. I wish all of you had raised your hands. But so my second question to you is actually, let's imagine you go to a supermarket and you buy this chocolate or you buy that soup. Are you really aware of the supply chain? Do you really track it consequently? Or do you even know where the food is coming from? I also want you to raise your hands if you do it every time you go to the supermarket. And I think this is actually the perfect question because there's nobody to blame for it. It would be probably a very extensive shopping experience when we track where our consumer goods are coming from all the time. But in my eyes, it's actually the perfect cliffhanger for our next expert panel. And I'm welcoming 3 phenomenal women who are all expert in the field of supply chain transparency. Please join me on stage. Gundula, Ullah, Yvonne, Zwick und Rena Kleine, you can just take a seat. Thank you so much for joining me on the stage for this very, very important topic. And to me, before I introduce you, supply chain transparency, it sounds super far away from my world, but it's actually not. It's so present. Every day I go somewhere, I buy something, and someone is actually responsible for the good I have in my hands. And to give you all a quick introduction of the amazing knowledge we have here, Gundula, Ullah, you are the chairwoman of the Bundesverband Materialwirtschaft und Einkauf, the BMI, and you are also chief procurement officer of Funke Mediengruppe. So you count more than 20 years of experience really digging into that topic and asking or actually looking for solutions on the sustainability field and also on supply chain transparency. Then next to Gundula, we have Yvonne. You're our NGO expert, I would say. You're the chairwoman of Baum e.V. And you're super aware of like the whole NGO side, I would say. You're consulting companies and advising businesses on how to become better and more transparent in whatever they deliver and what kind of goods. And then, next to me, we also have Rena. Rena Kleine is the co-founder and CEO of EcoTrack and EcoSearch. And she was unsatisfied by the lack of corporate SEG data that is being used to decide on suitable suppliers and business partners. And with her startup, she actually wants to take the mission and change it. So first of all, thank you so much for being here. And we all, and I remember it, probably you also remember it, September 11 in 2012, it was like a different kind of 9/11 when the textile factory in the Pakistani metropolis of Karachi fell into 1,000 rubble. And to avoid that profit maximization no longer risks the life of children, people, and exploits natures, experts have been working for years to bring more transparency to supply chain. So my first question is actually, sorry, there is so many information here on this panel. I have my piece of paper with me. I think that's probably used normal. The so-called supply chain law, Gundula, should now be part of the German solution and is planned to come into force in 2023. And in theory, that really sounds like progress. But the question is, however, is this actually already implemented in practice?
Yeah, first of all, I'm really happy that we have this kind of regulatory directive called the supply chain law. In German, it's Lieferketten-Sorgfaltspflichtengesetz. I think this helps a lot in taking responsibility for the whole flow of goods, from the origin to the product that you buy. And as you rightly said, Laura, it needs to be implemented in 2023. However, we are at the moment in a stage where we still need to define how do we track and measure the adherence to this regulation. So meaning checking, will the human rights be actually observed along the value chain? And speaking for about 10,000 members in the procurement association that I preside, we are still a little bit lost. So what do we need to submit? Do we need to put paper into folders and to submit it somewhere? Or is there a digital solution? What are the requirements? This is all still very much, I would say, under development. And we are actually very much pushing for digital solutions that we can submit this data. But it's not yet clear how do we do it.
And in your eyes, what needs to be optimized to help you make your work easier?
I think what needs to be optimized is that we have one standard that we define. Okay, so my first-year suppliers working in Funke Media Group, for example, the biggest stuff that we buy is paper. And I can go to my paper suppliers and tell them, look, I would like you to sign that you adhere to the human rights. They will say for sure, yeah, we have big catalogs and we have the certificate and that paper. But how do I ensure that the guy working in the pulp factory in Uruguay actually has the right conditions, that his human rights are observed? So I think we need to find one standard or one way to report and to document that actually these regulations are observed.
And is it even possible to track it for you now? Are you really sure all the time what you're buying or selling?
So I'm sure that everything that I buy for my first-year suppliers is certified. So when qualifying suppliers, of course, it's the responsibility of procurement to make sure that we don't break any laws. So that's basically the prerequisite for procurement. On the other side, when I look into this particular law now, it's not yet clear how we can actually drill this down to the very tier N, I would say, in the value chain. And it needs to be optimized that we have the right standard framework or frameworks that are developed, that we can ensure we are not in breach and that I don't expose the company towards fines or legal risks or whatever. So my role as a gatekeeper, as procurement, I still need to find the right approach, I would say.
And Rena, you are the co-founder of EcoTrack, and your aim is to make every purchasing decision more sustainable. What's the idea of your business when you listen to Gundula?
The idea of our business is to integrate sustainability into purchasing decisions end to end. So, I mean, every one of you knows, like, as Gundula said, do you know the sustainability performance of your suppliers? And by that I mean of every single one of your suppliers, also tier 1. I think you don't. Maybe you have emission data or special human rights certificates, but you don't know every CSR relevant criteria. According to studies, actually, corporates have usually 2% transparency in those sustainability data of the companies. So that's why we founded EcoTrack to increase that number.
When you talk about 2%, so what's the hidden cost we sometimes don't realize? What's like the worst thing we can imagine, but maybe we support it and we don't even know?
The worst thing that can happen is, of course, the high-risk suppliers, like exactly the example that Gundula just talked about. But we also want to transform, and this is kind of my hope for you today that you kind of exclude risk factors and look more into performance factors. So your company is probably setting a target like we don't want to reduce our CO2 emissions at 30% in scope 3 in the next 2 or 3 years. In that way, it's not helpful because we all know you need to monitor and measure data in order to improve and reach your targets.
So when I think about Gundula, and she has like tons of paperwork and I don't know, lots of different products. And Rena, then you come with your company and you want to standardize the data and really ensure the quality of it. And I'm thinking about your example, there is a paper guy in Uruguay. How do you make sure that you know what this guy in Uruguay is doing?
Yeah, so first of all, we have developed a technology that's called public sustainable data mining. And what that means is that we aggregate public data from the websites, from sustainability reports, and from all kinds of different data sources, standardize it, and then display it to people like Gundula. The quality, and this is something that makes us unique when you think about other competitors, we don't rely on supplier questionnaires. So with our way, we go directly to the source, buy our technology, and you then have to ensure that the data that the supplier sends you in the supplier questionnaire is maybe false or right. So by that we've actually detected a lot of cases in which the supplier replied to the supplier questionnaire a outdated certificate, for example.
Can you share an example? What happens, let's say someone fakes it and you discovered something awful behind it? Can you share an example?
Sure. I mean, there are some really low-case scenarios where, for example, the supplier is claiming that he is doing made in Germany products, but they have on their website, for example, in their sustainability report. And what we then can do, we connect to the certificate itself and ensure the quality, and then can say, okay, you're not actually having that certificate. Really, we don't really focus on what the procurement department then does with it. So that's up to Gundula if she wants to exclude the supplier. We do like, we have green-red factors, so we kind of indicate it, but that's up to the procurement. And I think that's really important because it needs to be still flexible in your system. She can't say, okay, tomorrow I exclude this and this paper supplier. That's just not working.
Maybe to add what
yes.
Rena just said is that technology will help us to make the right decisions in terms of risk management. Yeah. And this is all about the supply chain law. You need to be aware of what's happening with your suppliers, and you need to measure the risks and take appropriate action to reduce that risks and to improve the situation along your entire value chain. Yeah. And I think with this kind of traffic light system, this and the algorithms behind it, plausibility checks, this is a great help because, let's face it, I cannot hire like 10,000 of people to dig into the value chain and to collect documentation. Yeah. So we need to have technology in place that helps us make decisions and make decisions based on good facts.
Of course, yeah. Yvonne, you are, as I said, on the NGO side, and where do you see the biggest challenge we have currently in the German law as well when it comes to tackle this problem?
Well, one main challenge is to create coherence between the various standards that we have around. And we have faced currently so many ESG standardization processes that people get a bit fed up with all those processes and reading and listening to all the updates that you get out there. What happens on EU level, what happens on national level, what happens on level of IFRS, for example, International Financial Standards Board. And these are things that confront the companies right now. We have a discussion on EU level about a taxonomy for sustainable investments, for example, and the process on EU level for such a due diligence approach for business and human rights. But what I would expect is, when I consider the German law, which was adopted right now, that we come back to ILO core labor standards, the OECD guidelines for multinational companies, for example, and again, the business and human rights framework. So what Rena does with EcoTrack is a kind of bridge building for companies. So how to align those standards that are out there. And it is our job as NGOs to see, listen, and follow what is discussed on international level, and then do the translation work later on again. And to stay in dialogue with companies on one side, but also with service givers like Rena with EcoTrack and others that are here in this fabulous hall out there that are offering their services. And to tell companies what are the innovations out there that can be adopted very easily and integrated into core business processes and in the management.
I mean, I imagine it quite difficult. Let's say the sir in the first row, he has a company operating in 2 different countries. And in Germany you have a law, and then in Great Britain you don't have a law, and then you have another company in France and they have a different law. So how can you track that?
You cannot track it directly if you consider the various laws, but if you go back to the international standards, which I mentioned with the ILO core labor standards, they are pretty old. The OECD guidelines, for example, as the old-fashioned kind of international ethical and normative standards, then you shall be on the secure side if you adopt it and if you take your entrepreneurial view upon them, and if you consider what makes your company a worthwhile and trustworthy company, not only as a client, but also as a company that people want to work with. And this is a question of interrelationship and of interbeing with others, because you get your license to operate from society, from your clients, from the suppliers as well. And if you cannot run your business anymore in a profitable way, also in that terms of capitalism, which is trust, as a first issue that makes your company successful, then you should be driven well enough.
And what must politics focus on in your eyes to make sure that the supply chain does not become a faux pas? You know, that experts are talking about regulations and standards and they don't even work in that scene. I mean, we had that case with Bloomberg. They didn't really have a clue what they were talking about. They are actually classic advisors, but they're not really working in this field. So what's your idea on that? How can we avoid that faux pas?
Well, first of all, as Baum e.V. is a pretty old NGO. It was founded in the 80s. So my first advice to politicians would be listen to the pioneers. Listen to the companies that have been pioneering and conquering all those issues in the last 4 decades. And do not listen to those who are anxious about what is coming up now and to the newcomers who more surf the surface of the topics. Because you see it in Berlin, but in Brussels as well, who has the potential to show up, to go into the working groups for the standard setting processes. I do not experience too much practicability out of those processes. Above all, also, as it is discussed under the financial reporting dimension, and not that much, how do we come to sustainability performance, which is something that lies within our DNA as Baum e.V., and also within the startup scene, where so many are dealing with the issues and trying to find real solutions with deep dives and real impact measurement, and giving the instruments and the toolboxes into the company's hands to be able to deal with it. So first, and my most important advice is listen to the pioneers, because you can learn most from them, and this is also an advice that I would give to each and any company and also to startups and founders of new companies. Go into dialogue with those who have a long experience and track record with the issues. You can learn a lot.
And where do we find these pioneers?
Well, at Baum e.V., of course, but also in other sustainable business initiatives. You find it in the fair trade scene, for example, where we also see that it is a kind of old-fashioned thinking, but a very values-driven thinking, and a very strong conviction about principles, purposes, and targets. So purpose is a quite brand new word for something pretty old-fashioned, and so I think you can build bridges from each and any sphere and sector and civil society group, and we should get connected with each other to get it fruitful.
Gundula, did you already get in touch with those kind of pioneers? And if so, what did you learn from them?
So of course, as part of the procurement association, we are in exchange with these pioneers. At the same time, we are, of course, trying to make sure that the interests of our members are appropriately represented. So we need a dialogue. We need a dialogue with the likes of Baum-e.V. We need a dialogue with the politics. Speaking practically, now I take off the head of the BME and put on the head of Funke. Practically, I have to say, we are still pretty, I would say, lost. Yeah, there are so many companies around. There are the pioneers. There are a lot of startups. There are a lot of advisors. Everybody's jumping on that topic, as Yvonne said. And still, it's not really clear what actually we need to do to fulfill the law. We only know there's a fine of 2% of your annual revenue.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. So
2%, yeah.
If you have a turnover of 1 billion euro and 2% of that is quite a lot as a fine. So I would expect some clear guidelines in terms of what is expected from the companies, what we need to come up with, and 2023 is just around the corner, and the first report is due by then. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and we are only looking into Germany right now. Looking on EU level, they're just talking about it. There are working groups, and thinking of multinational companies having to fulfill these standards. I mean, I would become pretty nervous, actually, I would say.
Yeah.
So I would really expect some clear guidelines as to what is expected, what do we need to do to start being able to deliver. And of course, dialogue with the likes of Yvonne helps a lot.
Rena, what do you think when you hear Gundula's concerns? What would you advise her?
I mean, really, the only advice I can give is basically to start. No one is an expert, especially when we're talking about those huge supply chains that are very complex. So start. There are great resources of tips where you can easily get first indices of risk management, and then go into discussion. Also look cross industry. This can be a great tip to not only focus on your usually people or peers that you talk to, and then make your way down and really move forward, because there's not such one way. Every supply chain is different, every industry is different, so you need at least 1 or 2 supervisors that really dive into the topic.
Do you maybe know, Yvonne, where we can find these supervisors, or maybe even get involved in politics if we are an entrepreneur or maybe a startup founder? Because Brussels sounds so far away for us. We think, oh, Brussels, no, that's not something I can be involved. But actually, it's not true, right? There is a way to get involved easily, even though you are not an expert for 50 years on the politician side.
Yes, sometimes you only have to be bold and to knock on the doors and to get involved with your questions and ideas. And
in Brussels, you mean?
In Brussels, it happens that it is not such a closed shop as people think. I always experienced it to be very open door, and that you are welcomed even if you speak bad English, for example. So this is something which is highly tolerated in Brussels, and this is something where I always felt very comfortable when I started going on the international stage, because I was never abroad for studies or something. But Brussels is really a melting pot for all nations in Europe. We have to keep that in mind, and it is more the problem that they get not enough into contact with practitioners, but with the lobby groups that can afford the offices in Brussels, for example. And those are high rents, and we know how costly this can be, and it is super costly. But if you address, for example, your members of parliament coming from your country as an entrepreneur, as a company leader, or somebody who wants to provide knowledge, you have to think about it this way around. You provide knowledge and a perspective on a topic from a practitioner's side, and this is very valuable for each and every politician. Let it be in Berlin or let it be in Brussels. And just go for it and tell what the concerns are, how you deal with the issues, and what the solutions have been that you have found. Because showing the solutions and showing the prosperity upon chances and not that much risks, and how can we avoid regulation, this is something that they read and listen to each and every day, but they will give you some minutes and some minutes more if you are more on the let's look on the chances side and how can we come forward and move forward, because time pressure is there. And what politicians mostly say is that they don't get enough pressure to move forward and to be bold in agenda setting from the politician side.
So in a practical way, it would say you would recommend us to cold email them?
Yes, go email, send a paper.
I agree. I mean, from my experience, like since day one, we started to talk to them, and it's really like you can reach them via mail. You can reach all of us
on their website.
On the website, you find those informations in a short period of time, and we talk to them consistently, like on a European level, also in Germany, and it helps a lot.
How is it for you? If you imagine, I mean, you started the company, nobody knows you, you are talking to Brussels, and at a sudden you're involved in politics. I mean, isn't that even great for a startup founder to really know that you can move the needle, and 2 months before nobody knew you?
Yes, so we were founded 1 year ago, and I think like 4 months in the progress, they invited me to talk to the Federal Minister of Environment in Germany, and I was like, ooh, I didn't expect this like so early on. No, but that's what I mean. Like there are chances to talk to those people. It's overwhelming, but you can only learn from those experiences. And what I can also add on, I mean, those people are also not experts. It's like a win-win situation for both sides.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing we want to point out is that Brussels, there are also human beings sitting, and it's not a fancy construct we won't understand. It's people, and they have an email address, so if you have an idea in mind, you just cold email them, suggest it, share your expertise, because everybody has some sort of expertise, and we can all contribute to a movement, and not just say, oh, no, but I'm not in politics. So I think you agree, Gundula. When we're looking in the future, what do you think, which effort and costs are you expecting in this whole transformation process?
I would say we certainly need to build up like a small nucleus in the procurement function, taking care of supply chain transparency. This nucleus, of course, the size of it depends on actually the overall complexity of supply chains. In terms of cost, well, you probably need to invest a certain level into a certain amount of money into a digital solution.
How much?
Rena? So it really depends, I would say, on how deep you want to, or how sophisticated you want to have your solution. We've looked into blockchain topics. We looked into blockchain technology, which is a very costly exercise, and that needs to be thoroughly set up, so that takes a lot of time. There are other solutions that I would say medium size, in the 5-digit area. There are also opportunities to collaborate with startups, where you invest maybe a little Sockelbetrag, and then you can scale up. It really needs to fit to your business. You can spend hundreds of thousands of euros, or you can spend like 15, 20K and start developing the topic from scratch with a new provider. So I think you need to invest into 1 or 2, 3 resources. So in total, thinking about 1 FTE costs 70K plus.
If everybody is currently already doing the math and they realize, wow, this whole supply chain transparency can actually be very cost efficient, why do you think it's still important to invest? I mean, you can also say, okay, well, then let's save money on this topic.
As I said before, if you look into the fines that you could be confronted with in terms of not adhering to the law, I would say investing 100,000 euros versus 20 million euros fine is, I think, quite easily to calculate. So I think everybody needs to act. Everybody needs to make their own decision into how deep you want to get involved into this, how much money you want to invest and how much resource. But I think not doing anything is not the right solution.
Mm. And what are the consequences besides getting a fine from the government? Let's say I'm a consumer and I find out you as my product, I don't know, you produce my laptop, whatever, and you don't stick to the rules. Yeah. I mean, is there any negative consequence for even your customers?
For sure. I mean, brand damage is a big topic in today's times. I'll exclude the cost that we put on the environment. I think we all know about that, the external factors. What we see is, I mean, that's a negative example, like brand damage. When we look at it from the positive way, for example, there are great studies that show that employees care about your sustainability efforts. So if you want to hire good people, I mean, we all know about the war of talents, then these are factors that can really, really go, increase the cost. So to come back to the supply chain law, in average, the companies, the corporates have to pay 2% of their annual recurring revenue, which equals 8 million euros here in Germany. And then there's also the cost that you need for the team to actually qualify the data, and we can decrease that cost by around 80%, so we only need one supervisor at the end that can overlook the whole system. So, I mean, you can do the math, 20 people versus one supervisor, and then the cost for a tool.
Thank you so much. Maybe the very last question for you, Yvonne. If we don't have that much money, what's the single first step we can do?
Well, the easiest thing is to look for free of charge self-assessment tools, for example. So many of the startups offer basic entry levels where you get to know the instruments and where you can find out whether they suit to you and to your interest and the needs that you have. And another super easy entry point is to do reporting with a sustainability code, which is provided by the German Council for Sustainable Development, because simply starting what you said with reporting, there you can easily find the blind spots, and you even get a feedback paid by German taxpayers' money. So that's a real advertisement, because there you can see where you have to invest and where you have to fill in and build up the processes. And the sustainability code is integrated fully in so many instruments that I found in the hall out there, that would be my prior one recommendation.
Thank you so much. I hope you all really noticed the importance of supply chain transparency, and this is something we cannot ignore, not only because of the law, but maybe because we want to have better employees, we want to be attractive to customers. So thank you so much for sharing your really profound knowledge with us. And we're done with our expert session. I hope you also enjoyed it, and I'm wishing you a beautiful rest of our event.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can join me, Leonhard.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks to our panel for the really interesting discussion on the topic. It's going back to back. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Renat Heuberger. Renat, he's the CEO of South Pole, one of the global leaders in the field of climate action solutions. And Renat, I'm very curious because you will reflect back on 15 years of climate action. What have we learned? And I would say equally important, what's coming next. So warm welcome. The stage is all yours, and gonna be curious what you tell us here. Thank you, Renat.
Thank you. And good afternoon, everybody. Very, very pleased to be here. What a great moment. I think, frankly, this is the first time since at least 1.5 years where we're gathering again in a crowd, and we're gathering for a good reason, namely to ignite the fire on climate action. Our company and myself, we have been around for a while. I myself studied climate sciences in the 90s, and the funny thing about that is you know, when as a scientist, you read the books back then, and you went like, well, that is completely clear. Climate change is a problem, it's happening. And there was IPCC reports already back then. And then nothing happened. And you wondered, how is this possible? We had, in 2006, I brought you here a cover from a Time magazine from 2006, which says, be worried, be very worried. So, you know, those pictures with the ice polar bears, that was all out there back in 2006. And back then there was, we were students, and we decided that to transport this message into the audience, we need to create something tangible, something that you can actually do. I come to that later, but fast forward, of course, we realize it took us way too long, and perhaps we can reflect a bit today why that was the case. But in any case, here you can see us. That's me on the right. I think there was a conference in Cologne when we had our first days as a startup. We were 5 people creating South Pole back in the day. And what our approach was already back then, we said, in order to excite people about climate action, let's give all of us something concrete to do. Let's go out and finance projects to take out emissions. One of the examples I brought you here, that's a project we actually started in 2011. It's in Zimbabwe. It's today one of the world's largest forest conservation projects that exists. It removes or reduces every year about 3 million tons of CO2. This is Zimbabwe. It's a big amount of land where traditionally people have been cutting down trees to create a living. And together with our partners on the ground, we brought money and knowledge to invest in alternative businesses. So for example, honey production or production of rattan or other things. So to use the forest, don't cut it down, but use the forest to create something else. That's the project in Zimbabwe that we started already 10 years ago, and still today it's very successful and it's growing every year. That was our approach. Now, the demand, luckily, for climate action, again, it took us a while, but as you can see on this graph, we had a couple of bumpy years between 2010 and 2016. Many of you remember the financial crisis, the Eurozone, Greece, all kind of problems were kind of blocking our brains to look at the real topic that really matters, which is still climate change, as it was already clear in the 90s. But thanks God, Greta Thunberg and a lot of young people finally managed to do what we never achieved, namely to bring the message to everybody and to make sure that everybody's aware the time to act is now. So finally, after many years, the demand for projects, for services to reduce and remove greenhouse gases has come. Today, our company South Pole has about 650 people globally. About half of them are here in the northern hemisphere, and the other half are in the southern hemisphere, in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia. That's also, by the way, why our company is called South Pole. South Pole stands for our purpose, which is climate action and climate justice. The South Pole is where the ice is, where we want the ice to remain there, but also the South Pole also stands for the Global South, where we create most impact with our project. But today, our company has grown, of course, far beyond only doing projects. We realize, as all of you do, that you cannot just compensate your emissions. Compensating your emissions is important, but this is only possible on top of your efforts to decarbonize. So today we offer a full climate journey to our clients, which starts with footprinting and calculation, as we just heard on the previous panel, to understand what's going on, calculate risks, set targets, but then start to get active and get a clean supply chain, get renewable energies, and of course compensate your remaining emissions. So right now we have a full journey. Now let's look a little bit into the future. So where are we right now? 2021. It's an interesting year in many ways. We have, of course, climate change is around, right? It's no longer the problem of the future generation that some people thought. It's happening right now. We see the fires in the US, we see the floods in Switzerland, where I'm from, we see glaciers which have been around, all of a sudden they're not around anymore. It is happening right now. And one thing that is, of course, disturbing me a lot, some of you may remember the Build Back Better hashtag, right? So the idea was the pandemic is here, people don't fly around anymore to useless business meetings, people stay at home, so why don't we basically, and then of course the government funding is needed to recover, why don't we build back better and now use this opportunity to get climate action on the road? Unfortunately, it hasn't happened so far. 2021 appears to once again become a record year on global emissions. Now that is really sad. How is that possible? 1 year after the pandemic, already we are again approaching new records. And I think it's important to realize, and that's perhaps one of the biggest mistakes we made over the past years. We somehow believed, or it's perhaps economic theory, that governments set the rules and private companies then follow those rules, and we have all been waiting and hoping for governments to finally take action. I can tell you after 20 years of having been in this space, it doesn't happen that way. I've so far never, ever seen any government which created climate rules against the interests of the main industries. Let's just face it, lobbying power is too big. It doesn't happen like that. Interestingly enough, in Germany, for example, I just read a study, apparently 85% of the top polluters of Germany have more stringent targets than the government. So the idea that governments are just going to fix it for us is not happening. Instead, what has to happen is governments and the private sector inspiring each other. And this is now where the hope starts. This is the graph where you can see how many companies actually now have climate targets of the global Fortune 500 companies. And you can see nobody really cared until 2015, and then it starts growing exponentially. We are now at 30% of the biggest companies, they have climate targets. The question is, how can we move those 30 to 100%? Another point I want to make here quickly, these global Fortune 500 companies are the listed companies. Those are the companies that you read about all the time in the media. But, make no mistakes, we have a lot of companies in the world who you don't even know the name. Who has ever heard about Adani Group? Adani Group, anybody? Who's Adani Group? It's one of the largest Indian conglomerates building coal mines in Australia right now. Nobody knows about them. Nobody criticizes them because you don't know. So there's a lot of the global economy is currently hidden, private, sometimes state-owned, but not exposed like listed companies. So when all of you go out and you talk about climate, never forget, we should not only look at the companies, the usual suspects we all know from the media, we should dig deeper and look at those guys who are secretly somewhere and polluting the planet and nobody knows about it. But nonetheless, I want to basically end this chapter on the positive note that the more companies we can get into our team, and let's think about this as a football match. We have the team which is pro-climate action. The more companies we can convince to voluntarily come on board, the more lobbying power we have for governments to create the rules. So it's not governments against private sector, it's both. We have to inspire each other so that the laggards who are still sleeping, they will feel it the hard way because regulation will come. But it will come when we are able to increase our football team. Another point I would like all of you to be aware when you're going back to your business. The past couple of years have seen a lot of target setting. Many companies set net zero targets, science-based targets, and so on. We did a research study ourselves, and we looked at companies who have set net zero targets, and we asked, so who of you has actually milestones? Who of you has concrete milestones, like what are you going to do this year, next year? And we found out nearly 50% of the companies had a target, but no milestones. And in my opinion, that's not good enough. If it's January, you have eaten too much for Christmas, and you have a desire to reduce your weight, you cannot just think about how many kilograms do I want to lose, maybe 10 kilograms, maybe 20 kilograms. At some point, you have to go to the gym, or you have to start doing your push-ups and your sit-ups, otherwise it doesn't work. And we have to be clear that those companies who set targets, that's a great start, but our question should always be, okay, and what are you doing this year? That's the important question. Now, where does that take us in 2030? We see currently an immense growth, more or less in anything. We have much more companies who want to embark on a climate journey. We have much more companies, many more companies who want to go climate neutral. We expect, and it's not actually us, that's studies from a number of sources, the carbon market alone is expected to grow 15 times until 2030. That is, of course, fantastic news for all the projects around the world who are ready, but who currently lack the finance to go ahead. Mangrove plantations, peatland restorations, reforestation, forest conservation, all these projects that are there, the business case currently doesn't work yet, but through the power of companies which offset their emissions, we can finally get those projects financed. So, I would like to end with a strong call to join the football team of climate doers. I like to say we're climate walkers, not climate talkers. I really think it's all clear, the science is clear. I also believe that Frankfurt is a very interesting city as being the financial capital of Europe, if you will. If not here, then where should climate action now really ripple across the industry, getting integrated in performance ratings of banks, of pension funds, of the entire industry? If we are able to get people on board, I'm quite sure we have a much higher chance to get governments, not only here in Europe, but also globally, to join our fight. And the laggards will have to follow us. In this sense, I wish you and all of us a lot of success, a lot of inspiration. This is not a sprint, it's a marathon. But the more people we can inspire and we can convince that climate, if you think climate, don't think costs, think investments. These are profitable investments, not costs. That's a common misunderstanding. The more people we can convince, we talk about investments, we talk about jobs, we talk about livelihoods, we talk about SDGs. This vision is a vision worth fighting for. And once again, thanks a lot for having me here, and let's rock the boat here at the festival and beyond throughout the years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Renat. So you're going to join my football team tomorrow, because we will be back on stage with you for our expert panel when we talk especially about carbon markets. So I think you gave us a good food for thought already. I'm very much looking forward to discussing more with you tomorrow.
Thank you.
So
thanks once again.
See you back on stage tomorrow. Thanks. So for action, what do we need? Data. So now we're going to talk about sustainability data as the basis for better decision making. I'm going to hand over to our expert panel moderator, Lukas Spreiter. Lukas, you're the co-founder of Unitic. You're also the head of sustainability at the KI Bundesverband. So you're all around AI. and data. And I would say, if you're ready, please come on stage. I'll hand over, and then the stage is all yours. Have fun.
Thank you. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our expert panel on sustainability data for better decision making. We have now 30 minutes with really experts on this topic that I would like to introduce to you and would have on stage now. Please welcome Helen Tacke. Hey. Kersten Karl Barth from NG Impact. Hey. And Nicole Formica-Schiller from Formica Health. And the German Air Association as well. Give a warm welcome round of applause. So, we thought we'd start off this panel and to get a little bit into the topic with a little game. So, it's a smart, short association game. So, I'll give you, as panelists, a word, and I would like to have the first word that comes to your mind for that word. So, we'll start with the trial round. So, if I say dog, what is your association with it? Helen.
Dog.
Yeah.
Friend.
Mommy?
Dog. Hund.
Dog. Best friend of man.
Nicole.
Warm welcome and love.
Nice. So, speaking about the topic we're all here about for today, impact, what is your association with that?
Intention.
Well, that's my life. I'm coming from NG Impact.
Absolute important.
So, get a little bit into the topic of the this panel. What is your first association with the word data?
Chance.
Mostly wrong.
Mostly wrong. That is very true.
Absolutely underestimated.
And last but not least, we're also talking, obviously, a lot about sustainability. So what is your first catch on sustainability?
Oh, it's the future.
Absolutely not our future. It will be the future of all the further generations.
That actually would have been my answer.
So I was first this time. That's good.
Yes.
Well, I would say it's a business chance as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that would
that's
be
true.
my association. So now we're a little bit into the topic of this panel, and we haven't yet met our panelists so far. So let me introduce you to Helen Tacke. Helen spent several years at an early stage venture capitalist fund, and 2019 she founded CoZero, a digital carbon action platform for corporate carbon management. Their software is able to track, forecast, and manage companies' carbon footprint and help them on their decarbonization path. Then we have Kersten Barth. He definitely is on the panel the longest in sustainability. Already in 1992, the year I was born in, he finished his diploma in electrical and power engineering.
This was nasty, buddy. I'm feeling old right now.
It's the truth, though.
It's the truth, indeed. That's
But
right.
already then, I was still a little baby. Kersten worked in hydro power plants. And a few years later, he even became the director of corporate sustainability at Siemens. And in the time frame he was there, the director, they won the award for the most sustainable industrial company 3 times in a row by the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, something that he told me has never been achieved after that anymore. He also voluntarily has a healthcare project in the Amazonas region where they are building a facility, and recently he became the managing director of NG Impact. And NG Impact delivers sustainability solutions to corporations, cities, and governments across the globe, and unites engineering, consulting, and digital services for over 2,000 with over 2,000 employees worldwide.
Super nice advertisement. Thank you.
Last but not least, we have Nicole with us. She represents the new digital generation, driving topics such as artificial intelligence, blockchain, disruptive technologies, and a sustainable digital future. She is the CEO and founder of Formica Health AG, a global advisory firm talking about these topics. And she's my colleague in the German AI Association, where she is the head of the steering committee and the task force AI EU regulation, as well as the board member and spokesperson for Bavaria. She's also a book author who recently released her book, Artificial Intelligence and Blockchain in Healthcare, How COVID-19 and Future-Oriented Technologies are Revolutionizing the Status Quo. Happy to have you here, Nicole.
Thank you.
So let's dive into the topic of sustainability data. What does that really mean? So Helen, you are the CEO of CoZero, right? Your software measures and tracks the carbon footprint of companies. So in my experience, data is always very sparse. Kersten already said it's always wrong. What data are you actually able to use and to leverage from companies to track their carbon footprint, and what are the measurements that you derive from that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for our carbon action platform, data is basically the fundament, right? Although there might be data that are wrong. And yeah, we need to tackle with lots of data. We have the philosophy that every procurement decision within companies actually comes with a carbon footprint. And that gives you the scope which data is actually involved, right? Because if you take, just the smallest process or buying decision you take as a company, it's clear, what data you actually need to aggregate to understand, to bring in our system, to have the right fundament for emission management and calculations. So that comes with like systems of like a classical energy management system, travel management system, ERP system, but that also means data coming from more manual work or paper, including invoices, etc. And this makes it very complicated to bring all these different data, the ownership, who's responsible for these data, together.
My next question is to Kersten. So, Energy Impact accelerates sustainability transformation for corporations and cities worldwide. I already mentioned that. And being active in this whole sustainability space, obviously I also live in my own bubble, right? I go to Fridays for Future demonstrations and do all kind of that stuff and get all the news that, cities, governments are not actually doing enough in that direction. So do you think that enough actions are actually being taken in reality to advance and progress towards global sustainability goals, or is not enough being done? And if so, why? What is holding us back? What are the roadblocks here?
Yeah, well, Lukas, thank you for the question. I think we've been talking about this before. Well, since the year 1992, the year where you have been born, the year of the first Rio de Janeiro climate conference, this is, I think, the most asked question on this planet. Yeah, I don't know how many times this has been asked in several agreements, on several panels, and as countless are also the numbers of answers that has been given. Yeah, so honestly, even the sloppiest, laziest authority or the slowest regulator should have known the answer by right now. So there's nothing more to invent. This doesn't mean that I say that authorities are sloppy or lazy. No. It's just to call a little bit your attention. I think the question is less what governments or authorities or regulator can do. The real critical question is a question that we should ask ourselves. Yeah? What can we do? What should we do? Now, which kind of actions could we undertake to certainly, first of all, accelerate the transformation, what is really needed, no doubt about, and also, secondly, what is, from an economical standpoint, achievable. So the question is not what others can do for us, the question is what we can do. And there's no excuse anymore, and again, as you said, I'm in the business since many years. I've run through so many discussions with different customers, with B2B customers, also with kind of countries or macroeconomic parts, cities, for example. And these are countless discussions. It is always a super roadblocker that they say, well, we have to wait for something. We have to wait for an authority or regulation. This doesn't help. This doesn't help. What we have to do is really do the things that we can undertake right now and not wait with us. And again, there are plenty of possibilities right now also in place, comparing to 1992. Yeah, data evaluation was pretty difficult. We didn't have the means on the possibilities to apply mathematical models into simulations and sensitivity analysis. Right now, this is the moment where we can use these things that are going to help us tremendously. Me as a little engineer some years ago, I was dreaming of the possibilities we do have right now with data management, using this huge quantity of information that's around, and certainly what's going to be even more interesting in the future, artificial intelligence. Anyhow, these means, these possibilities, methods are giving us answers. The questions we have to ask ourselves, and I think artificial intelligence still asks not any question.
That is very true. You already mentioned a very good point here, that a lot of corporations and other people are saying they're not basically doing anything because they are waiting for regulation, right, to come in and actually push them on doing something. And this brings me to you, Nicole. I mean, you're actually the expert on that topic. You just released our positioning paper on the EU regulation. And in the last trial of the chancellor candidates last weekend, Annalena Baerbock said that every regulation basically is also an innovation driver. So speaking maybe as your position in the German AI Association, do you agree with this topic? Can regulation actually help us to accelerate innovation, or is it also more a dawning danger keeping us back because people say, I don't want to do this now, because if regulation comes, I might have done something wrong. And with regards to the elections next week, what would you recommend our new government to do to create an appropriate ecosystem where startups can foster?
Okay, so that's a lot of important and questions which I think to answer in every complete detail would take quite long, so we should have a second panel. So first of all, I want to say great welcome also from my side to the audience, and I'm really happy to be here also with all of you, because the vibe and the innovative vibe here in this room, you guys on the screen, you cannot already see it, but you might feel it. It's amazing. It's really amazing. So Lucas already started with this regulation topic, and I know many of you think like, oh my God, regulation, this is absolutely boring and we can't be bothered with that topic. And to be honest, I would understand if you have that approach. I just can tell you, we talk here about sustainability, tech, digitalization, innovation, and AI was mentioned, and as many as you have known, the European Commission, beginning of this year, came up with a proposal on how to regulate AI, artificial intelligence. And with your question, is regulation in general, when it comes to new technologies or to sustainable or disruptive technologies, is it good, is it not good? You could endless talk about that. Fact is, there will be a regulation coming, and now it's up to us, really up to us also as citizens, to discuss this proposal in the best interest and in the best way for our whole digital ecosystem. And when you refer to this trial and the statement of Annalena Baerbock, I would actually also say what I found very interesting in this discussion in this trial last Sunday was actually that the whole digitalization topic just came up. I stopped it at my clock, maybe I was a bit wrong, but at 8:54, so that means half of the time they started speaking about digitalization, which I was, from my personal perspective, finding a little bit surprising, because this is such an important topic for our future, for our present, and for our future generations. And getting back to the regulation question, yes, there will be a regulation, but any regulation, we talk about here about the regulation for artificial intelligence, but it might also be for any other technologies like blockchain or whatsoever. We always need to bear in mind, if there will be regulation, we have to try to create it in a way that it's flexible for any startups, SMEs and so on who have to work with it, and in the best interest for our society and for our economy. Because the kind of technology or AI we regulate today will not be exactly the one we're going to have in some years. Because this is what innovation also lives from and what innovation is and means. And this we always have to bear in mind, that we bring this all along together for the right ecosystem. And this was also your question, what I would recommend to a government to create a good AI startup ecosystem. It's quite a complex question because, of course, we have a lot of also investors here today. So there has to be a friendly environment that is attractive for investors to come. It has to be an attractive environment, you know, which also attracts foreign startups or SMEs to come here, but also for our local, and I can really assure you the German AI startup scene or also SMEs is so diverse and highly talented. I'm always impressed what AI solutions are out there and that they can really come up and fulfill their whole potential what they have. And I can also tell you this is not always easy. I mean, I'm sure there are also some startup founders here, and I'm a startup founder myself. There are challenges, and I think this is a huge task also for any future government to not just discuss about that, but to really put the right cornerstones out there and milestones, and also in an exchange with the players, with the startups and the SMEs and the whole ecosystem to set the right framework.
I agree. So we dove into different aspects of this entire topic. I think I would like to stay a little bit more on the regulation side. I see it, on the one side, I see it as a real big danger, because for startups, obviously, this also means having to deal with a lot of regulation, especially on the AI regulation side. But then, for example, today someone was telling me that 2023 there will be a new regulation telling smaller businesses, over 250 employees, that they now also need to do ESG reporting, right? So maybe the question to you, Helen, is obviously for you with CoZero this is also a chance, because if more people need to do this kind of ratings, this opens up an entire new market for you of smaller companies. How do you think about this topic?
Yeah, we think that regulation standards are super necessary. I mean, you ask us also for a final statement, right? And I think the standards we need are super crucial, yeah, for companies, because what we experience in different industries is that companies, especially large players, they are coming up with their own frameworks, yeah, and that actually leads to a point where it's getting even more complex, because at some point you need to bring all these different frameworks and standards back to one holistic platform, solution, standard companies can be guided with. And this is one very important aspect, and we try to be as collaborative as possible. We try to have a view on all these different standards that are coming up, especially from financial service industries currently, to basically normalize them, and to find same arguments, same criteria again and again, and to form a framework ourselves, because that is the only thing we can do in waiting for a standard coming more from the regulator side. But I think it is, yes, it's super important. I think the initiatives of coming up with own frameworks in different industries is good, but also leads to even more complexity. And that is why the data that is involved then in these frameworks needs to be actually normalized to be, in the end, also a comparison and benchmark again for other companies.
So you bring up a very interesting point about standards, and I think this is actually quite a big problem, also coming back to the data point that we're talking about, right? So obviously different cities, different corporations, they all have their own data standard because, I mean, talking about DIN norming we have in Germany, actually we're experts in putting out norms for paper and everything else, but then for data, I think maybe there's or still something missing, how to actually create good quality data in a standardized way so it's more comparable. Kersten, what do you think about this?
I'm coming a little bit from a different angle. So I'm really coming from business. We are working very much with medium-sized companies, especially in Germany, also abroad, of course. And, well, look, if you're looking at these regulative framework, everything is fine. I like it very much. It needs to be flexible. I like it very much that it needs to be focused, this for sure. But it's very difficult and always a threat that we are ending up into a kind of a continuous discussion around whatever frameworks, platforms, and so on. Yeah? From a very pragmatic standpoint, a pure business standpoint, or a little bit engineering standpoint, what is needed? First of all, we do need data in a suitable quality, correct data, as soon as possible. First of all, because with this data, we then, as engineers, we can work, we can develop solutions, we can really help companies to improve in whatever area. My area, of course, is around decarbonization and decarbonization data, so everything is the usage and of stuff and things. This is very important. It's helping us. It's going then to accelerate sustainability. Yeah? And this is what we are desperately waiting for. To have discussions around whatever difficulty and regulation and waiting for each other. This was my kind of pledge at the beginning. Don't wait too long. Yeah? We have a long way to go. The colleague before said it's a marathon. Yeah, and obviously we even haven't started yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if there's a regulator or a kind of an idea how to accelerate a solution around regulations, around platforms, that at least we can start, that we have a kind of a ground layer, base layer we can at least build on, I think this would be highly appreciated by industry, by business. So if something is going in this direction, wonderful.
Maybe just, I like that very much, right? That idea also to be very practical, right? We need to start. And talking about a framework that is basically needed and talking about transformation that is behind that, is actually digitization is the transformation most of the companies are still facing, and this is the fundament, because without being in a more and more digital world, understanding data more and more granular, being able then to accelerate sustainability because you can define the decarbonization path for your industry and for your company. That's the very fundament. Yeah. And this is missing, especially for, you asked for small companies, right? And yes, there are frameworks coming up from larger ones and for larger companies, but the small ones, they actually need to just first of all, cover all the digitization aspect.
Yeah. I think just one last remark and then I'll try to remain silent for a while. I think what I'm personally facing is certainly the data quality, as I said before. Data is wrong. Exclamation mark, full stop, that's it. Yeah? And because if the data is just almost right, it's not right, it's wrong. Yeah. Yeah? So I think a regulative first step approach could be data discipline. Yeah. Yeah? If you have data, it needs to be correct. Yeah. And concentrate maybe on less data, but please have it correctly, at a certain quality level, instead of measuring everything around, and because this is not helpful. I think this might be a first step.
Yeah, I want to add certain things because there have been several important points being raised. First of all, getting back to the regulation and then to the data. First, regulation. It is important, yes, absolutely important that we discuss this upcoming regulation because this AI regulation, this is one of the most important legal decisions coming up in the next years for us, for all of us, because let's face it, each of us will be affected by AI. This is a given fact. Yeah. And we already are in touch with AI in our everyday life. Sometimes we recognize it, sometimes we are not even aware of it. So therefore, this is such an important topic. And having said that, that's why it's important that we have a proper stakeholder consultation when it comes to this regulation. So that it's not top-down and this is the regulation, now you have to stick to that, and that's for Europe. This is the regulation for the startups, for all of you. So startups up to the big players, you have this regulation, and now just deal with it. That would be a wrong approach, and this is also not the approach Europe is going to have. But having said that, getting back to your point, we can, as Europe, not get stuck in endless discussions because the global competition on AI, on any disruptive technology, I mean, we are as Parmanico Health in AI and blockchain also with regard to health, we see it every day. the global speed, you know, is amazing. And the world is not waiting for Germany or for Europe until we have finally made our mind up on data, on regulation, or whatsoever. There's huge potential, what I've said earlier, but there needs to be a legal certainty. And this is what many people, companies, startups, and so on, which deal with AI every day, struggle with, because they say we have really legal uncertainty at the moment when it comes to the upcoming regulation. I mean, I speak also from a business perspective to investors, and they actually say at the moment we keep it back because we don't really know in Europe what will be there in some years with regard to the regulation, but also, second point, with regard to the data. And we all know we don't need to talk about AI if we have not the proper data. And getting back to the data topic, it was perfectly mentioned. We need just not data. We always talk about data. We need good quality data in a huge or in a good, sufficient amount. And if we don't have this, then we have seriously a problem here. And I mean, there have been approaches already, also by the European Commission. I mean, some of you might know that there has been the kickoff for the European health data space. The overall aim is that you can share, or data shall be shared within Europe. And I mean, this is absolute logic. We all travel, or we have the ability to travel within Europe without borders. So why should our data actually suddenly kind of stop at borders? It would not make sense. But we need to really grab the full potential of data for everybody to know how to access it, how to use it in a legal certainty and in a proper way. And this is absolutely crucial. I don't even want to say for the next years. It's already crucial for now, because AI is also not, we all know that. This is not a future technology, as it's often called. It's here, and it has been already here in the last years, or decades, actually. So that is very, very important for us.
Right, we're nearly at the end of our panel now, so I think we've learned and looked into a lot of different aspects, right? So we saw, obviously, data is still a very big problem. There's not enough data. The data that there is wrong and in bad quality, and yeah, it needs to be. It's not accessible as well. We've looked into regulation topics, so we basically came to the conclusion that regulation is coming, so we can't do anything about it, and that we maybe need to make standards to also improve on data and exchangeability of information. So coming to an end now, I would like every one of you to give the chance to have like an end statement, or what do you think that we need to do to accelerate sustainable transformation through data? What are the key steps? Who needs to become active? Helen.
Maybe continuing your last words, Nicole. First of all, secure data exchange is super important for that. Yeah, that we are not struggling with borders, that companies actually get into a ecosystem for their sustainability management, where it's driven by an intercompany reporting, yeah? Where you can exchange data, where you can get to a granular level by including all your partners, suppliers, etc. So this is very essential, I think, and connected to the digitization aspect I just mentioned. Second, it's ownership. So understanding who is basically responsible for all the different data points. Yeah? Where can I get it from? Yeah? What are the relevant systems? What are partners I need to reach out to basically understand my data scoping? And one final point I want to make is we were deep in AI and data the last couple of minutes. We shouldn't forget about a more softer topic, which is communication. Yeah? So there are always also people behind, especially in the very beginning, especially for smaller companies, and to have that fundament to understand how can I achieve my data scoping, yeah? What's the basis I need to build on my sustainability and decarbonization strategies on that. I think the right communication and involvement of relevant people within an organization is super essential.
Kersten?
Yeah, just to make it short. I think I'm a boy that still was working with Lochkarten, so you can see it in the Deutsche Museum right now. And again, I think the development of data was for me is tremendous. It's a miracle. But we need to make sure, and this is my pledge, data discipline, and this is what everybody can do. There's no excuse, no regulation needed. No, take care of your data. Make sure that the data you generate is correct. If it's not correct, it's crap. So please do this, and this is, I think, my main pledge.
Thank you. Some last short words from your side, Nicole.
So I will, looking to the clock, I will rush a little bit. I just want to encourage all of you. I mean, we have absolutely right data, you know, be aware of the importance of your own data. But in general, I really want to encourage each of us, and I know you all guys here do, that we use digital innovation in the best way possible for us, for our society, for our economy, and for our environment, to really create a sustainable digital future for us now here, but also in particular for our future generations, that they really can look back and be really proud of us and say, hey, these guys at that time, they really got it, and they really tried everything possible in the best interest for our future. And this is deep to my heart and what we should all do.
I think these are great ending statements for this panel. Let's use data and technology for a better future. Thank you, everyone, for listening to our panel.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Lucas, we're going to continue that conversation. We're going to pick up some topics because now we're going to focus on good data that is hopefully not wrong. So we're going to focus on impact measurement and the question why metrics matter for impact investors. We have a very strong, powerful panel. It's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. First of all, Lena Thiede. Lena, you're co-founder and partner at Planet A Ventures. I would say a rather new impact investment fund with a focus on early stage impact startups. So great to have you here. Maybe you take a seat over there. Constanze, Trautwein, you are co-founder as well, but Chief Product Officer at Impact Nexus. That's a software as a service company that helps startups to get that data game right. Constanze, great to have you here on board. You might take a seat here. Last but not least, Lukas Schmitt, you're Head of Innovation Products at Tacke. Tacke, that's the innovation lab, innovation platform. You bring together corporates, startups. Warm welcome. And take a seat. And big applause for our panelists. So we were listening carefully. We were like, they are stealing our topics. No, but we have the good data. And we have a good range of perspectives here. From the impact investor, of course, we're going to talk about why metrics matter for investors, but also the corporate perspective, the startup perspective. It's a quite complex topic. I'll start with the most difficult but easy question, why metrics matter? And that's a question to all of you, but maybe, Lena, you want to get started and get us into the topic.
Thank you. So typically, the investors look at financial data exclusively, and we see that this has led us to the dead end that we're in now, because the legacy that we leave for the planet is just overwhelming. And I'm not talking about climate crisis only, but it's an ecosystem crisis. So I'm deeply convinced that we need to bring scientific insights closer together with business and investment decisions. Right now, if you are an investor looking into impact or into this space, there's no way that you can differentiate between different funds. You have no way of knowing which investment generates the most positive impact for the planet or for social issues. And we need to get there. We just don't have the time and resources to throw money in the air and see what sticks. We need to know what is part of the solution or what is part of the greenwashing. And that is why impact metrics are so incredibly important.
What's your perspective on this, Constanze? Why do you think metrics matter?
Yeah, well, Lena already mentioned it's so important to have a common foundation to compare impacts, to predict impacts, to know about the impact potentials, the impact performance. So, for me, it's the common foundation when we talk about comparison of companies, their contributions, and also to, for individual company development, to see how things are going, if companies are improving, and also to learn about their developments.
I think we would all agree that this is a really important topic, but in real life, in practice, how much does this play a role? That's a tricky question as well. When you think of corporates, when you think of startups, Lucas, you work a lot at the intersection of corporates and startups. What's your observation there? How much do metrics, impact metrics, really matter in that day-to-day operations?
Yeah. I think with regards to why these metrics matters, you all both already mentioned some point. It's important for the decision-making process in that sense. So I think most important why impact metrics for impact investment matters is that there's a difference between ESG investment and then the real impact investment. And in that sense, first of all, ESG investment, what is currently very much in common and really having some momentum and a lot of talk of, is more about, instead of really actively doing something good, it's more about preventing not to have a negative impact. So if we come now to impact investment, it's more about really proactively do something. And here, the big difference is if you look at the ESG part, the traditional sense, it was more in a sense that we use more qualitative ways to estimate that, to really estimate. If we now go into impact investment, or also for company sides, and really want to proactively do something, we need some metrics to really see how we can compare, for example, some solutions. So if you proactively invest something, you need to compare solution A and B. So this is in that sense, of course, important for investment decisions in that sense, as you mentioned, but also for companies. So if, on both worlds, we have the same topic then here, because we, for really, if you want to have business decisions or investment decisions, you need to measure them basically on certain metrics that you can compare solutions, instead of only just saying in ESG, I don't invest in this and this, exclude it. And I think, yeah, this is also same true for corporate companies in that sense.
I think it's also good to make that distinction between ESG and then impact investing. Lena, maybe to you the question, do you feel that ESG investment now is mainstream already? It sounds like that's everywhere. Is everybody focusing on? And impact investing is still a niche, or is that topic getting a lot more traction as well?
Yeah, well, triggered by the climate crisis, we see an immense interest in ESG. And there's a lot of claims out there without any foundation. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the ESG funds, most of them still invest into fossil fuels. So we really need to look carefully at what is labeled as ESG. And interestingly, the chief investment officer of BlackRock just resigned and published a bit around like how he thinks why there's so much, what the labeling, ESG labeling, is doing, not only not improving the situation, but actually can do harm by giving everybody the feeling that, oh yeah, a lot is happening, while underneath very little is happening. And so for me, it is crucial that we go that step further and come to a point where every single investment is a sustainable investment, because we just cannot afford unsustainable investments any longer. And I see that market growing. What we lack is an understanding how to bring evidence for that impact in the social as well as in the environmental field. And I think a lot of movement is coming from sustainable finance disclosure regulations. So the EU is really triggering more disclosure there, which is very positive. But as long as investors don't see evidence for the positive impact that they are generating, it will be hard to convince them to invest into there, because, as you know, I mean, the claims are out there, but to really understand, yes, my investment is making a difference in the world, we need to get there.
That also means, I mean, that highlights the importance of metrics, but there's also a lot of challenges when it comes to the practical applications. I mean, we have the startup perspective. There's a lot of challenges for a startup. I mean, they have to struggle with so many other things and maybe not so much worry about impact metrics at first. How do you observe this? Maybe, Constanze, we start with you, because your solution should actually also help startups to get their game together and get the metrics right.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, startups have their specifics and their certain challenges. So, yeah, their volatile business model, their limited resources. So we really have to be kind of pragmatic also when we would like to measure and assess
the impacts of startups. So yeah, what we are doing at Impact Nexus is really to build a software that enables them to manage and to assess their impacts on their own, but really with a pragmatic approach. So starting with the identification of their most important impacts and then going step by step further to the measurement and also to the most important KPIs connected to their metrics and which count most for them. So yeah, I think it's important to measure. It's really important also to agree on metrics. We need some standards there, but it's also important to be a bit flexible and pragmatic, and also to yeah, if there's no other way to use qualitative approaches to impact assessment, and also to be open for that and not only look at metrics which maybe also be at the risk that we then miss important dimensions, for example, in the social space where metrics are hard to generate. So yeah, I think we need this flexible and pragmatic view as well.
The flexible
yeah,
metrics.
may I come in there? Yeah, it's exactly what I experience as well, that for startups, they don't have established processes and their products change. So it's really, a lot of startups struggle to understand their impact. And the other day, a startup told me, yes, now I'm ordering this batch of 1,000 plastic bottles of China, but once I'm up and running, I will have these sustainable glass bottles from local Germany. So that's a difficulty, but also the hurdle for them to calculate their impact is high at the moment. There are no tools, as you're saying. And so a lot of startups struggle, and they come to us as an impact investor sometimes saying, you know, the money I could get somewhere else, but you can help me understand my impact. And sometimes it's disappointing. Their impact is smaller than they would think, but they're very mission-driven. And I think it's important that we provide tools, provide access for at least an impact hypothesis for them to work with. And we see that once we provide startups with that evidence, in our case we provide life cycle assessments, it's so powerful, because then they can go to their customers, say, look, we bring the quantitative data, the evidence for the claims we are making.
What I find interesting when working with impact startups, maybe it's not just about the lack of tools that are not there, but even when you think of the theory of change, they haven't thought through this. Many of them, that's still where they're lacking. And Lena, as you said, maybe it's also a bit of a dilemma. If you're a startup, you're small, you still have to struggle. Your impact is limited also because of your size. So it's about future and potential impact that is even more vague and more difficult to quantify then. Do you see, when we talk about the startup scene, I mean, the startup scene itself is massive. There's a lot of capital being deployed. Everybody who says, I'm a startup, somebody's coming with money. Do you feel there's a shift that more and more startups are really hardcore impact driven and others are also geared towards that direction? Lucas, how do you observe this?
I think overall, I think 2019 we founded a Green Tech Hub here in Frankfurt together with Finance in Motion and an impact investor. And at that time, it was like the topic was, of course, already big in the news and also with regards to partners, but it was still more also from partner side, but also from startup side. It was cool that we're doing that, but it didn't have the intention as it has nowadays. And so I think especially over the last 2 years, we saw that this interest in the topics, as well as from the startup side, but also from the company side, has increased a lot. And in that sense, also with regards to the understanding of impact, so where maybe a couple of years ago, impact was more generally phrased, startups now can more clearly communicate what their impact is. And here I wanted to also come up to a point that you mentioned with you say that you help startups to better communicate or better understand their impact. We see in that sense the whole market, we are currently in a very exciting times with that regards, because it's shifting a lot and they're not the one clear standard on how to assess, for example, impact. And startups that really can clearly communicate, also in experience what we have sometimes in the programs, we see if they work, for example, financial institutions that now also have the pressure with regulations and so on to more actively input. We see that these startups also have a better market opportunity when it comes, if they can really clearly communicate it to partners, instead of startups that just more generally say, okay, we're having a positive impact, but really cannot really assess or set some certain KPIs behind to tell to partners that want to work with them, this is the impact that we have. So not only with regards to this, I think here also startups that really understand shifting into the market and having a positive on changing the market also in that sense.
And when you say clearly communicating, it's about clear metrics. So let's be clear now, what are the metrics out there? There's quite a lot. Constanze, what would you say are the most important key metrics that everybody should also be aware of and work on, and rather do a check, do I report on these metrics? You want to go, Constanze?
Well, I mean, I think CO2 is one of the most popular metrics at the moment. So, yeah, so, and I mean, there are great initiatives trying to standardize metrics, for example, the IRIS metrics of the Global Impact Investing Network. Yeah, so in what I think is that it's really CO2, but as I already said, I mean, for example, looking at the social dimension, metrics get a bit more fuzzy, so then it's more individualized choice of metrics for each startup and each business model.
That's interesting. Things are getting fuzzy. So, Lena, the impact investor perspective, you get a lot of applications for funds, I assume. There's the mailbox will be full, startups asking for money. What are the things that you are looking for in terms of metrics?
So we are investing quite broadly across all 6 sectors of the EU taxonomy, be it mobility, be it energy, but then we are looking for 4 key areas. We're looking for change in climate mitigation, waste reduction, resource savings, and biodiversity protection. And it's easiest for climate change, obviously. There you have the tons of greenhouse gas emissions. And biodiversity, it's getting very challenging because it's a highly regionalized, localized impact that you generate. But we are working on that. And I mean, I would love to refer to an international standard, but it's not there. So, and we are pushing for it, but as long as it's not there, I think we need to go ahead. We need to move. And so that's why we are working with life cycle assessments and just do what needs to be done and get a quantitative understanding of the impact in these 4 key categories.
Maybe LCA, life cycle assessment, we hear this over and over again. Can you explain it in 3-4 sentences, very basic, because I'm not sure if everybody's fully aware of what it is, but it's out there.
Mm-hmm. So it's really the understanding that you take a product or a service and you look at the whole life cycle of that, from the extraction of the raw materials to the use phase, to transport, to the very end of life. So your reference framework is critical. For instance, if you take an e-bike subscription model, the music is not in how that e-bike is being produced, but the music is in what kind of transport mode does it replace. And so we calculate that for our investments, and then we lay it against the reference product, what's on the market now, and we get a very precise understanding of how much better that innovation really is. And sometimes it's even surprising to ourselves, and then if we see, no, the impact is not significant, we don't go there, even if the business figures are quite attractive.
But I can also there imagine, thinking about the life cycle assessment, that this even makes things more complicated and more complex to look at, because it really starts from the early beginnings. If you're producing something, think of textile again, we talked about this, maybe you don't even have the insights on the supply chain transparency and all that.
Yeah.
How difficult is it in practice?
Yeah, no, it is a complicated process, and but we are serious about it. So we have something that's quite unique in Europe. We have a science team on board that can really calculate these life cycle assessments. But I think what we also need is a lower hurdle kind of software-based tool that allows startups to generate an impression of their impact and to broaden the scope of that. Because obviously we can do it for the companies we're working with, but we are not offering it as a service for all startups. And but there are examples. For instance, Impact Forecast, a Dutch company, they do that, and they do it quite excellently.
So we talked a lot about the startups. Lucas, of course, in the tech quartier I mentioned before, you bring together startups with corporates. You just mentioned in the last 2 years, 3 years, there has been a lot of change in the startup world. How do you observe the change in the corporate world?
like overall, of course, the change already. I think the whole ESG movement, I think, started somewhere 20 years ago. So I think over that time, but I think especially over the last years, especially from regulation, but also from the market side, a lot have happened. So, for example, for instance, if we see, we work with a lot of banks and financial institutions, and we see, for example, there's the ECB regulation, and they're now pushing banks to also into climate risk assessment for stress tests. And we see really from the corporate side that this pushes companies to more deeply evaluate their portfolios to really cover these environmental risks. So I think these are big movements where we see that this led to, especially I think in the last 2 years, a high interest in really also on the corporate side to do more actively and to more think about it. Of course, this was also there before. It's not like only 2 years, but like especially in that time, I think it accelerated even more in that sense.
What's interesting maybe there, I mean, we've been asking, we heard it before, the role of regulation. Everybody is kind of asking for regulation as kind of the holy grail and the thing we stick to. Or somebody just needs to regulate and then we all follow. Maybe we have some good things happening, of course, now on the European Union level with the Green Deal. There will be regulations, but what are other incentives, incentive mechanisms that are taking place, need to take place? When you think of corporates, are they moving because of competitiveness, because of employees demanding it, because of customers demanding it? How do you observe this? Why are corporates changing in this direction?
I think, of course, this is a big driver, but I'm completely with you. I think it's not only about only regulation. And I think, of course, this is one of the big drivers, but of course it should be also otherwise incentivized, and it is, in my opinion. So what I would add to next, of course, regulation incentives also to, in that sense, risk, is overall the risk with the change of climate. We also, banks are facing more environment. For example, if you're an insurance company, then you have to, of course, also evaluate more other risks. So this is also a market thing, but also on the other side, in my opinion, we're in very exciting times with regards to impact, because new markets, so for example, if you see some companies around carbon capturing here, right, and you will have that also in your portfolio companies, most likely. You don't invest in these companies only because of regulation, you invest because there are new markets emerging. So I think people that really early on invest, and here, for example, of course, Tesla's very hyped thing, but this was one of the first really big scale-ups in the impact space that has created a new opportunity. So if you proactively invested into this because you want to do something good, you created a whole new market opportunity, which is, of course, a very big incentive next to only regulation.
Yeah, that's definitely the interesting part. Maybe, Constanze, when we talk about the software solution, as I said before, this is a focus on startups. Tricky question, why didn't you choose to go into big corporates with a solution? Does this need to be more tailored, more customized?
Well, I mean, we come from the startup side with all our experience, with all our research we did before. We are also heading towards small and small companies, but we really have to think they have different different requirements. So when we talk about startups, it's really about uncertainty. It's also about managing uncertainty and limited resources. And I mean, big corporates have a complete different base of resources. So, and there's also a lot out there for sustainability management for big corporates, but what we are really missing are tools that are for startups and for young companies and small companies. So, and I mean, they really feel the pressure from their investors. I mean, especially the startups which are innovative, which want to grow. I mean, they have to report their impact data to investors, because investors get a lot of pressure. So I think there's already a lot of tools out there for big corporates, but we need more tools, more intelligent tools for startups also to manage their limited resources well. And also because, I mean, measuring is always an effort, so we really, really have to think about when we demand it and then how we do it and how we can do it in a really effective way. And also combining it, that's what we do at Impact Nexus, we combine it with smart features which really help the startups and young companies, or also small companies, to get the best data they could have for their business models, and also to keep their efforts low. And have a solution that really helps them.
So you're measuring the data, then hopefully you don't have the bad data. As we heard before, data is always wrong, so ideally we have good impact data. But still then, this is also a basis for decision making. And Lena, this is not the only one. I mean, a startup needs to have the impact, or like an impact venture needs to have the impact data, but also the financial performance. And there will be trade-offs at some point in time with whatever decision. How do you see this in real life, these trade-offs? And how do you handle this?
So we are investing in companies that have impact baked into their very DNA. So as long as the company grows, the impact will grow. So for us, there's no conflict of interest there. We see that regulation plays a major role in opening these new markets that you mentioned. And I think the economic transformation that's just about to begin will be so tremendous and will really rethink all sectors of our economy. And we see that we are partnering with a great company in the e-fuel sector called Eneratech, and the need to decarbonize air transport, for instance, just opens up so much space for innovation. And I'm convinced that impact metrics are not only important to defend yourselves against your investors or so much, but you really have a better understanding of how significant is that innovation of a startup, and that is also the question: will it be the winner of that economic transformation? Will it be the big corporate in 30, 50 years' time? And that I think is the beauty of these impact metrics. It gets you a better understanding of the prognosis of a company.
But maybe still, let's dive a little bit deeper into this. Maybe then you're in a very comfortable situation to say we only focus on the ones who grow, and with this grow their impact. Now talking about corporates who incorporate impact metrics, they have their financial metrics. We'll see these conflicts of interest for most of the players and for most startups. Would you agree or disagree, Lucas?
So you mean like, I think with regards to the question for the trade-off, I think, as you mentioned, I think we have the shift that there's not clear trade-off between. So if you look at the traditional system, also what also ESG looks into is you have two key metrics. Basically, you have the risk, and you have basically then also your interest rate and profit out of this. What with impact comes, you have a third metric that you basically need to measure. And I think with that regards, if you identify markets or also opportunities where also this impact metric can have a big role, then of course it does not necessarily need to lead to a trade-off in that sense. So I think this is what I think the only thing in the last couple of years, since the 70s, we've become very good into measure, for example, risk also, which also was one of the foundation for the whole venture capital area. But if we now start to also better understand the metrics and the impact, and behind also where we can channel them, where we don't have in markets where we don't have a trade-off, but more in the sense where these metrics are combined, I think then it's not directly that you always have to decide, okay, I take a trade-off between impact and, okay, then I have less out of the investment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's. You wanted to add something?
No, I just wanted to add this buzzword, license to operate. I think it's very much around that. You will lose your license to operate if you don't, if you're not following this transformation towards a more sustainable development.
That's interesting. When we talked about the incentives, why do corporates engage in this for regulation purposes, for external pressure, for competitors? Some will understand that they will lose their license to operate, and some are already starting to understand this, and that's also kind of a driver for this transformation that is taking place, and that's some observation we've made in the last couple of years for sure. Maybe let's take a bit of a look into the future, fast way forward. First of all, how do we advance then in the impact metrics field? We talked about standardization also in the panel before. You said, well, we can't wait for this. But also on the entire scope of capital available, that would be a big question. I mean, Lena, you've done great achievements so far with Planet A Ventures. Would it be too provocative to say this is still a small drop in the ocean and it needs to go way beyond this? How would you see this?
It's certainly still a niche, but if you see the growth rate of impact VC money, it's tremendous. It's over the last 3 to 4 years, it has multiplied. So there's a lot of interest in there, and also the big institutional investors are slowly moving their big ships around, BlackRock, etc. But there's a lot of uncertainty. What is sustainable? What qualifies? So we really, and there are a lot of good international standardization approaches. We need to accelerate that, and we need to come to an understanding. And that being said, I think we will need to work with what we have, and for instance, the impact management project with their 5 categories of impact is a good start. I think it's a good way. And let's be honest, sometimes you can measure tons of greenhouse gas emissions, and sometimes you can just say, well, 25 people used this software. It's not good, but it's a start, and I think we need to start.
Maybe similar question then for you. How do we advance in the field? Do you see good progress there? What also keeps you positive that we are going in the right direction?
Yeah, I mean, it's that initiatives you already mentioned. I mean, there's really a lot of movement, and yeah, I mean, people are aware of the problems we are facing today, so they also demand from companies to really, yeah, find solutions for that, and so that keeps me really positive. I mean, the whole trend is a very positive one, and I think it's also really good to start with ESG and to really try to avoid harm and to really do a good risk assessment, but then to go further and to really think about how businesses can contribute to solutions, how they really can benefit their stakeholders. And yeah, I mean, the impact management project you mentioned, they do a really good work there, and I mean, there's happening so much with intelligence, data management, and yeah, I think if we bring these sides together to really yeah, the impacts businesses can create, and also the data and the tools, then we will I look very positively in the future, and think we will find great solutions to improve.
Because let's see if you share that positive outlook, but I'll give you also a last difficult question. And we talked about metrics. Here's a metric for you. Do you think in 2030, Tech Quartier will be 100% focused on impact?
I think this is very, I wanted to add to the point, first of all, that I think in the outlook, I think with regards to data and transparency, this will be a big movement because it's easier to understand what is really impact. Also, currently we talk a lot about CO2 environment when we talk about impact, so this will also become more easily to assess, for example, social impact. With regards to what you said in that correlation also for Tech Quartier, I think it's important that this does not mean that everyone needs to be now an impact investor. I think this will be a big movement, but of course not everyone needs to integrate. I think, of course, if it's more easy based on the data, but also if we see more impact investors that actively, for example, set some metrics that are basically the early adopters and show how it is working, then also some other investors can integrate them, can use these metrics to implement them also into their portfolio, but does not need, in my opinion, not mean that everyone needs to be an impact investor per se. On the other hand, to come back, I think it will be more common that if you not basically have some certain impact, or at least, I think with regards to ESG, if you, yeah, as long as you, for example, have negative impact, I think you will not be able to exist in, of course, to some extent, in 2030, it's a bit early, but this will be a big difficulty for you and your startup if you're not basically, if you have a negative impact, and for the ones that have a positive impact, it's a big opportunity in 2030. So most of them will focus on that, in my opinion.
That comes back to the license to operate that you mentioned. I would suggest the following. We come back in 2030 and check on the status quo then, how the impact investment sphere will look like. Therefore, I would like to say big thanks to you for this really insightful panel, and a big applause to the 3 of you. Thanks, Lena, thanks, Lukas, and thanks, Constanze. So, we're coming to an end of our second innovation area. Now, break here on the main stage. I'll see you back at 4:30. Enjoy the exhibition, get some coffee, some pizza, and I'll see you back here, 4:30. Thank you very much.